Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei. One was hailed for its strategic depth and equally compelling narrative, while the other shared similar success with its own unique quirks for its many multifaceted franchises. Comparing these two gaming Goliaths on the surface, it would seem that they would be completely incompatible with one another. But on the contrary, one person inside of Nintendo thought differently than the rest. One Kaori Ando. Ando, a producer at Nintendo, had confided in Fire Emblem producer Hitoshi Yamagami that she wanted to create Fire Emblem's first crossover title, but with Pokémon being its collaborative partner. It was an incredibly intriguing idea at the time, as Fire Emblem's popularity was waning around then. But Nintendo still rejected the project outright, as Pokémon Conquest was currently in development, a Pokémon crossover with Nobunaga's Ambition. Another strategy RPG game, this one by Koei, which was similar to Fire Emblem, but was based in a more historically accurate feudal Japan, rather than a fantasy world. And while crossing Pokemon with Fire Emblem may have been a good idea, Pokemon Conquest was too far in development, and contracts were signed with Koei that this game would be happening. This, however, didn't dismay Ando, as she had a backup plan waiting in the wings, a crossover between Fire Emblem and the Shin Megami Tensei mega franchise. Nintendo had some history working with Atlus, the developer of the series, so it seemed like an easy enough fit at first. That, however, all changed when Ando actually pitched her concept to the developers, as they seemed completely uninterested or even bored at the very idea of the concept she was presenting, declaring that they were too busy to even undertake it. Thus, the idea was shelved, seemingly for good. Until 1 year later, out of nowhere, Atlus began inquiring about the then long-forgotten project, wondering if there was a chance that they might be a part of such a collaboration. Their workload had been so immense and taxing for the past year that the mood had dampened so much that they couldn't really get excited about anything new or interesting. But with all of their busy work out of the way, the team showed their true colors, and were actually incredibly enthusiastic about the idea of working with the Fire Emblem developers, as they felt they were their equals in the gaming industry. None thought this more than Shinjiro Takada, the new title's producer, who saw Fire Emblem not only as a rival, but as a goal to strive towards in his work. The team he'd gathered together would feel the same. Veteran directors from Shin Megami Tensei series Mitsuru Hirata and Eiji Ishida were both brought on due to the sheer amount of work that the project would entail. A project that would take 5 years to complete from conception to production. The overarching ideology of the project would change regularly. At first, it was a toss-up between Intelligent Systems or Atlus, and who exactly would be taking on the production. Atlus, in the end, did most of the heavy lifting. Originally, it was planned that the title would be similar to Fire Emblem, but with an Atlus twist. The game was to be a simulation game with classic grid-based tactical combat and reincarnated protagonists from the series past playing the lead roles. But Ando wanted Atlus to be bolder with its decision-making and not simply make a Fire Emblem clone. The fact that this was their first title in the genre wasn't helping. However, Takada had a simple solution to their problems. Why not let the developer known for RPGs make an RPG? And thus, the true form of the project finally began taking shape as a more traditional Atlus RPG, in vein of the many Shin Megami Tensei titles before it. With full production came the introduction of the team, who would attempt to combine the two radically different franchises into one cohesive unit. Yo Harazuki and Makoto Miyauchi, with Harazuki being in charge of the main narrative, would write the scenario for this creative effort. For a time, Harazuki struggled with how to incorporate the classic Fire Emblem characters into the Atlus mythos, but then an idea struck him: Japanese shamanism. More specifically, he took the concept of kami-oroshi to heart, a notion wherein a deity attempts to communicate by possessing a priest or ritual dancer. Elaborating on this further, he borrowed from the Kagura ritual dance, which brought about the story's central focus on the entertainment industry. Yet another topic that Atlus had yet to tackle, and they would tackle it in many ways. From a narrative that followed one character's rise through the Japanese pop idol industry, to side stories that depict the struggles of those trying to make it in the entertainment industry. Each was made to help the player better understand and sympathize with the people they see on their screens daily. To round it out, each of the characters we would follow would be involved in a different sect of the industry, from action heroes to pop idols, and even budding child stars. This was a delicate balance that Atlus had to maintain. Should they hone in on the story or the character drama? To combat this, they introduced an intermission between each chapter where players would be free to tackle as many side stories as they'd like. But, as entertainment became an increasingly crucial part of their storytelling, it required Atlus to do something they hadn't done before. A break from Shin Megami Tensei's traditionally dark storytelling was needed, and in its place would be a more upbeat atmosphere that the J-pop industry tried to maintain. To bring the J-pop industry to life, Atlus brought in many professionals who had worked in and around the field. For the soundtrack, they hired Yoshiaki Fujisawa, known for his work on the multimedia project Love Live. Even though he had never worked on a video game previously, he tackled the problem head-on, designing a track that gave each area its own unique feeling to it, with plenty of groovy tracks on the side. For the pop idols themselves, George Aburai, an in-house composer, brought in many famed singers and actors from around the industry to sing the songs themselves and make the experience more authentic in the long run. After forming his team, Aburai worked to analyze the personalities and traits of the main cast, determining how their performances would play out in addition to other factors, such as their profession's impact on their portrayal. These performances weren't limited to vocal ones, as Fire Emblem Studio Anima and Studio 4 Degrees C came together to animate them all in either traditional 2D animation or full-motion captured 3D animation. The animation set a certain tone that would resonate throughout the project, with its setting directly related to this. Helmed by the game's art director, Fumitaka Yano, it would take place in modern-day Tokyo, a familiar backdrop for any Atlus title, although the team's center of attention was aimed squarely at Tokyo's entertainment districts, such as Shibuya and Harajuku. At first, they tried to mimic these real-world settings to a T, going on many scouting trips to get their exact realistic proportions. However, as development continued, they soon realized that their expectations had to be trimmed back considerably, as travel times between these locations were ludicrous at their ambitious levels. Over time, they incrementally reduced the size of the environments to make them more enjoyable for players, while still keeping the aesthetic that they had yearned for, juxtaposed by their choice of color. The real-world locations revolved around bright colors, emulating their focus on the entertainment industry. Each main character, designed by famous Japanese artist Toei 8, also reflected this, with each character given a feeling of both friendliness and splendor. The reverse of this came with the game's dungeons, the idolospheres. Dropping characters in medieval armor into the modern-day setting just felt strange to the design team, making an area just for them a necessity. And the idolospheres weren't without their own quirks. All of them were designed with their real-world counterparts in mind, with Illusionary Shibuya 109, for instance, being themed around fashion. Color, too, was an important factor, with its much darker tones fitting of a dungeon. The Mirages themselves were the reason why these even existed, and that was mostly due to their design. As Hideo Manaba, the Mirage's character designer, wanted to remain true to the original characters while emulating the sharp and dark character style of Atlus games, he gave them a more battle-hardened appearance. Their armor was meant to reflect the dark events they had faced, with any part unneeded for survival being degenerated. Two contrasting worlds were colliding, all coming together. However, their impact had yet to be given a name. Over the 5 years of production, the title had changed rapidly, and was very different from what they had originally intended. No longer a Shin Megami Tensei game, and no longer a Fire Emblem one, it was something else entirely. And so, Tokyo Mirage Sessions was born, but with one caveat: its subtitle, Sharp FE. A standard musical notation. It was meant to denote that Tokyo Mirage Sessions was a unique hybrid, and something all its own at the same time. Even the inclination of the logo was meant to represent the game's altered perspective on the two series. But would this new perspective even find audience? The only way to find out would be to release it. Releasing on December 26, 2015, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE seemed like any other Shin Megami Tensei title on the surface. You play as Itsuki Aoi, your everyday average high schooler whose normal life is quickly turned upside down after the game begins. His friend Tsubasa is kidnapped during an open audition for pop idols by monsters called Mirages, forcing him to give chase into their own dimension, the Idolosphere. Carefully exploring the new and twisted world, he finds Tsubasa being drained of her life, or Performa. His friend in trouble, Itsuki awakens his own Performa, cleansing two of the Mirages, revealing classic Fire Emblem characters Chrom and Keita. With their newly obtained power and allies, the two become fully fledged Mirage Masters, and finally fight back against their new foes. As the story goes on, the two enter into the entertainment industry, and in turn, Fortuna Entertainment, and attempt to discover the truth behind the Mirage's existence while solving their fellow actors' problems along the way. Tokyo Mirage Sessions was all about the side of showbiz that made Japan, Japan. This was all meant to build a picture of the entertainment industry for the player, both the good and the bad. Atlus wanted to show how difficult it is to work in a field where millions of people watch your work daily, and at the same time, how rewarding it can end up feeling. There was nothing but sheer admiration for the industry, and it even showed up in the combat system. A hybrid in more ways than one, Tokyo Mirage Sessions combat was eminently familiar to anyone who had played one of Atlus's past titles, and even Fire Emblem in some cases. After triggering a battle with a Mirage in the Idolosphere, Itsuki and whomever you have in front of the party at the time are transported to a stage for battle. From here on, the system begins to play out like any other Shin Megami Tensei title. Each character has their own distinct fighting styles and magic spells, like Zio and Bufu, whereas enemies have similar strengths. Determining the exact weakness of your enemy, whether it be magic or weaponry, is critical to victory, along with the various buffs, debuffs, and healing that is standard for any RPG. Hitting one of these weaknesses triggers a session attack, a move borrowed and slightly altered from Persona, where all the party members attack a given enemy. Sessions quickly become crucial to success, making most enemies undefeatable without it. On top of this, Fire Emblem's weapon triangle was added in, enhancing the battle system with the rock, paper, scissors-like gameplay fans of that particular franchise had grown to love. And even still, more Fire Emblem mechanics were layered on. Traveling to the Bloom Palace, where Tiki, a character from Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, resides characters that can perform Unity with their Mirages after collecting enough Performa. Unity allows you to upgrade your Mirages, ranging from new skills via the skill system from Fire Emblem to class changes, such as generals and sorcerers. Weaponry played a crucial part in the process, with each character gaining a variety of upgradable weapons over time with distinct advantages and disadvantages. All in all, Tokyo Mirage Sessions' battle system was the perfect blend of the two franchises, not overshadowing one or the other, but instead complemented their weaknesses and strengths. But battling wasn't all there was to do in Tokyo Mirage Sessions. There was an entire world to explore that the team at Atlus had painstakingly created, from Shibuya to Harajuku. There was much to explore, with a plethora of side quests and shops to visit and complete. In addition to these side stories were another part of the experience, offering further insight into many of the characters that you just wouldn't get from the main game. Conversations during these little story bits throughout the game are usually done with a system similar to visual novels, with characters speaking to Itsuki alone with a variety of expressions. Considering this and the overall experience, you'd think both Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem fans would be clamoring for the new release. You'd be thinking wrongly, however, as Tokyo Mirage Sessions sales were barely scraping the bottom of the barrel. In Japan, its critical success was average at best, only earning slightly above average scores, while financially it could only break 50,000 copies, an amount that paled in comparison to either of its inspirations. However, Nintendo and Atlus still believed in the property and decided to release it globally, albeit with some altercations to characters' ages and outfits, as well as basic human skeletal structure. This, of course, didn't go over well with the few fans who would buy such a heavily Japanese-influenced title, and with a less than stellar localization by Nintendo Treehouse, many simply refused to buy the game based exclusively on that premise. Even with all this controversy, sales in North America ended up being double of that in Japan's and Europe's, and the majority of critics on all sides seemed to agree that Tokyo Mirage Sessions was a fantastic celebration of the two franchises, just not something that exceeded either one. But wasn't that its true purpose? At first, it was more Fire Emblem than Shin Megami Tensei. Then, for a time, it flip-flopped, praising one franchise more than the next. But as time went on, the two found a commonality, a sort of kinship between the two, and began building on that newfound friendship to build something more. Something that glorified the two for their many storied years in the industry while being its own unique creation at the same time. Even though the series may never continue on again from this point, the talented team at Atlus can rest assured that they at least accomplished that one small feat.
No series has managed to reach the mass popularity as quickly as the Pokemon franchise. With the combined efforts of its popular trading card games, anime, and wide variety of video game experiences from the mainstream to obscure, Pokemon was able to win over the hearts and minds of millions of players around the world for nearly 2 decades. However, by 2016, their once massive fanbase had begun to dwindle due to the franchise fatigue that oh so many video games receive. The Pokemon Company needed to find a way to bring back the fans that had launched their fanbase into the stratosphere, while appealing to those who had never even touched the series before, something that just wouldn't work on the handhelds that they called home. But there was another option on the table, a device universal to the majority of people living today, the smartphone, and with it, mobile gaming. With this in mind, there was one remaining question: where to start? As a sort of testing ground for this more contemporary outgoing, it all began as a joke. On April 1st, 2014, the immeasurable media giant Google revealed the Google Maps Pokemon Challenge to the world as a mere April Fool's joke. Using Google Maps, players could scour the globe in search of 25 Pokemon from each successive generation, and the ever-elusive Mew, with all of them being strewn about various real-world locations. The idea was conceived by Pokemon Company's Tetsunikazu Ishihara and Nintendo President Satoru Iwata as a way to test whether or not a mobile Pokemon title could possibly succeed. The results of this experiment spoke for themselves as millions took up the challenge that they had extended en masse. A mobile Pokemon title was a sure bet, but who would take on such a monumental task? Game Freak had the mainline games to worry about, and the rest of the Pokemon plethora of secondary developers had little to no experience with mobile titles. There was only one team up for the task, and conveniently enough, they had just worked with them on their little joke: Niantic. An internal startup founded within Google itself by John Hank, Niantic's main business interests were within the newly budding augmented reality side of gaming. Starting off by developing Field Trip, an app that let you find interesting things hidden throughout the world, the team truly came into their own with the release of Ingress, a team-based augmented reality game, tasking players with choosing between 2 teams and fighting for dominance over portals that appear throughout the world. Ingress was an engrossing app that encouraged many players to travel, make friends, and uncover the hidden story behind it all. Whole communities, friendships, and even relationships blossomed due to the app's influence. An experience that even drew in Ishihara and his wife back in their home country of Japan. He was intrigued by how players of the game were drawn to recognizable landmarks and the many possibilities that the mechanic provided. Possibilities that the Pokemon franchise could latch onto and further improve. Seeing an opportunity, Ishihara along with Satoru Iwata soon began talks with John Hank on making a collaboration between their respective companies, with Iwata in particular being excited by their new endeavor. In the year after the deal, Iwata could continue to provide further insight on the project, crafting it to be worthy of the Pokemon name. But he wasn't the only franchise veteran overseeing their effort. Pokemon's executive producer and iconic music composer, Junichi Masuda, was at the helm for the majority of the time, giving Niantic the knowledge he gained from his work on the franchise from the beginning. Very few Pokemon spin-offs had ever been given such attention, with the majority of them being left to their own devices. But Niantic's case was special. They were building Nintendo's first entry into the mobile gaming market. It had to be spectacular. It had to blow everyone away. It had to be a hit. an instant classic in every shape and form. And Niantic was willing to take up that cause, as it had just been freed from Google and became its own independent company. Officially announced by Ishihara on September 10, 2015, Pokémon Go's reveal trailer inspired awe and wonder in the millions of people who watched it. Real Pokémon in the real world. A dream that many had dreamed of when they were children, and one that franchise creator Satoshi Tajiri had envisioned from the very beginning. Iwata too was part of this dream. However, sadly, he passed away before he could ever see it become a reality, even giving advice on the project when he was admitted to the hospital near death. It was a sad turn of events for Pokémon Go's development. But, as they say, the show must go on. The world was hotly anticipating this new release, and Niantic was happy to oblige. Releasing on July 6, 2016 in North America with a slowly roll-out release around the world, Pokémon Go was what fans had been craving for and wasn't at the same time. It most definitely let players live out their dreams of catching Pokémon in the real world, yet not in the fantastical way it had been advertised as. Pokémon Go's gameplay was deceptively simple. All players needed to do was step out into the real world and hopefully run into a Pokémon in the wild. Using a GPS and internet connection, they could be found anywhere. They could be in the grass, rural areas, mountainous regions, or even near historical landmarks. Where one would assume a real-life Pikachu live is probably where you would end up finding one. Once you have one of the critters in your sights, all you had to do was simply swipe forward, throw your Pokeball, and pray that you successfully capture the Pokemon. No battling required. Catching Pokemon was the bread and butter of Pokemon Go, with battling only being a supplementary affair. As you gain levels like any standard RPG, you eventually unlock access to the game's rival teams, Team Valor, Mystic, and Instinct, and choose one to represent. With teams came gyms that you could take over and run, using a light version of Pokemon's standard battling system to overcome your opponents that involved less skill than one would hope. The only way to take over a gym was to, of course, level up your Pokemon and evolve them into even greater heights. But how could you do that without battling? Easy. Pokemon candies. Sending your unneeded Pokemon to Professor Rillo earns you candies to level up your Pokemon CP. The higher the CP, the more powerful the Pokemon, encouraging players to catch as many Pokemon as they could, no matter how weak they were. It was essentially a bare-bones version of the battle system Pokemon fans had come to expect. A nice distraction to be sure, yet unmemorable in the long run. Other features such as eggs, potions, and Pokestops strewn around famous landmarks that gave free items were additions that only slightly improved the experience. But overall, it was mediocre in comparison to past Pokemon entries. But what they were trying to sell wasn't amazing gameplay, it was the experience of it all. And people ended up buying into that. Downloaded over 15 million times in its first week, Pokémon Go was one of, if not the most successful launches of any app of all time, as it went on to download 500 million more times in the preceding months. It was official. Pokemania had returned. What had swept up the world into a frenzy in the later years of the 90s was now repeating itself nearly 2 decades later. Not the games nor multitude of spun-off media could hope to match its success. But its true success wouldn't be measured in sale numbers or apps downloaded, no. Its true success came in how it impacted a generation. Pokémon Go got many gamers to step outside for once and explore their surroundings. It made people want to exercise, travel, and even make new friends along the way. Whole communities sprouted up around the title with massive crowds chasing after rare Pokémon, and some people camping out in groups just to keep on catching late into the night. People who would have never met each other before were brought together because of this one little title, and the endless friendships and relationships brought forth because of it are all the accolades it needs. Rarely does a game impact the industry, but never has one affected society socially as much as Pokémon Go. As it slowly fades into obscurity, possibly never to regain its popular status again, Pokémon Go will always be remembered fondly as something that showed that video games can be much more than just story and gameplay mechanics. They can be something that changes who we are for the better, when they look out where they're going first.
Star Wars. When you hear that name, many things come to mind. From the space opera that started it all to the legendary score that anyone can remember off the top of their head, there is no shortage of iconic elements that the series has come to be known for, expanding from film franchise to a multimedia-based one, with Star Wars branded toys, merchandise, TV shows and more. As time went on, they introduced the franchise to video games with mixed reactions. Some were great, others were subpar, and many were just plain terrible. While the majority of the games were fun to play and classics in their own right, none held a candle to the movies that started it all, save a few. This is the story of one of those few. It all dates back to 1999, shortly after the release of Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Longtime fans of the movies had critically panned the movie for its story, overblown use of CGI, and terrible comic relief. The reboot of the entire franchise was a critical dud, in more ways than one, and George Lucas, alongside his gaming studio, LucasArts, needed to find a way to make up for the losses they endured. And so LucasArts started looking for the next hit developer to work with. Many developers knocked on LucasArts' door, from Pandemic Studios to Raven Software. One stood out from the rest, a recently renowned studio named BioWare. Coming off their smash hit take on the Dungeons & Dragons franchise, Baldur's Gate, BioWare was a hot commodity in the industry at the time, as they were able to turn once failing franchises into massively successful and influential video games. But even they hadn't had the chance to adapt the franchise they were itching to work with, Star Wars. Luckily enough, LucasArts had seen their work on Baldur's Gate and felt that they were the right company for the job at hand. BioWare's CEO, Greg Zuschuk, and LucasArts producer Michael Gallo quickly went into talks about what kind of game it would be, and ended up giving BioWare two choices. They could either take the easy route and try adapting the next Star Wars film, Attack of the Clones, or go with something that would be difficult to create, but involved the creative freedom they so desired. That second choice was a story taking place 4,000 years before the events of Episode I, in a galaxy where there are hundreds of thousands of Sith and Jedi fighting each other in a galactic war. They would be given no restraints with this project, within reason. No one had ever covered this time period before, so the worlds and characters they created could be wholly original, a precursor to the modern films. Anyone who wouldn't take this offer would be a madman, so BioWare, of course, took it in earnest, and LucasArts made good on its promise of creative freedom, as little to nothing was thrown out by the publisher. Whenever they sent their work over to Skywalker Ranch, only minute details were changed, and they were usually praised for the work they had done. The only time they were ever told to add something in was when LucasArts suggested they put the game on the newly announced Xbox, a challenge that these PC-minded developers were more than up to, after they had already tackled the subject with MDK2. A system with architecture that they were already accustomed to, and a platform in dire need of hit titles. It was a win-win for BioWare, LucasArts, and Microsoft in general. As with all BioWare projects, they wanted to not only improve on what they were known for, but also exceed everyone's expectations. They wanted to do something that no one studio had truly created yet. A living, breathing galaxy filled to the brim with compelling characters, rich and exciting worlds, and stellar narratives. This was their goal. This was their dream. They just needed to find the right people suited to the roles they needed. One of the first people they brought on would be the director, Casey Hudson, who'd been working at the company for some time, with his major credits being a level designer for MDK2. Seeing something in him, he rose through the ranks of BioWare faster than anyone had before, lending his hidden creative thought processes to the project. For the lead programmers, Mark Brockington and David Faulkner were brought on, tasked with helping to bring this absolutely massive world to life, and on the Xbox no less. But what's a world without its characters? And Star Wars wasn't lacking in that department. Led by David Hibble and Derek Watts, the art department was charged with bringing over 60 species across the Star Wars universe to life, alongside the planets many of them called home. That was the primary job of concept artist John Samuel Gallagher and his team. As they pulled from the pages of the extended universe of novels and the movies alike, they began to take many interesting worlds from these stories and showed them in a new light. From the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk to the den of Sith Korriban, each was given a great amount of detail by the environmental and 3D design team, enough so that they would be fun to play in, yet not too overbearing on the Xbox's weaker processing power. However, contending with the system's strength wouldn't even be the half of it. Hundreds of hours worth of scripting and voice acting was needed to make this world a reality. But what's a Star Wars game without its story? And BioWare's was proving to be more ambitious than anything that had come before it. Drew Karpyshyn, the game's head writer, wanted to craft a story that was galactic in scale, one that had a clear villain and hero, yet had a certain morally grey tone to it. The player could be a villainous Sith or heroic Jedi. It was all up to the player in his opinion. A plethora of choices were needed to make this vision a reality, so he and his own team wrote and wrote for years, coming up with over 15,000 lines of dialogue, spoken by over 300 individual characters, a feat that just hadn't been tackled in the industry before. BioWare was known for breaking boundaries, but this was revolutionary for video game storytelling. And it wasn't all in English either, as many of the races spoke their own languages, making the task all the more difficult. Still, they persisted, and they soon passed their work over to the sound department, who'd been given the monumental task of taking all of the text and turning it into an actual narrative. Under the stewardship of Julian Kawaneski, the lead sound designer, BioWare would bring in over 70 experienced voice actors to provide each race with a distinct accent, and give each of the main characters unique and interesting personalities. Still, they didn't have enough actors to play each part. To rectify this, they had them act as multiple characters at a time, spreading them throughout the galaxy so the average player would never notice. Actors such as Catherine Tabor, Tom Kane, Jennifer Hale, and more played this careful balancing act, trying to make each of their characters their own. These characters would be the foundation of BioWare's new world, a living, breathing world with many different people from all walks of life, whether they be light or dark. While the voice actors certainly had a lot on their hands, that was nothing compared to what Jeremy Soule, the game's composer, had to go through. Living up to John Williams' iconic score was a tough call. It had to be perfect and nail that classic Star Wars feel all the way through, yet still be original and memorable in its own right. Having worked previously on The Elder Scrolls, Morrowind, and BioWare's own Neverwinter Nights, he was more than up to the task, giving the game the classic soundtrack that it is known for today. Classic yet original, those were the feelings that BioWare were trying to capture when they were creating the ultimate Star Wars experience. Their only hope was that it would exceed beyond their expectations. Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, releasing on July 15th, 2003, was everything that a Star Wars fan could hope for. The ability to play as Jedi or Sith, the worlds that they only had encountered in the pages of books, and the characters that were as detailed and remarkable as the ones that existed in the films were all here and more. After using the extensive character creator to create a protagonist to your own liking, you are quickly thrust into the world of Knights of the Old Republic, a world ravaged by a war between the Galactic Republic and the Sith Empire. Waking up on board the ship Endar Spire, under attack by the Empire, you fight your way through the ship only to be forced to flee with fellow Republic soldier Carth Onasi. Crash landing on the Sith-occupied planet Taris, the two hatch a plan to save Bastila Shan, their leader, and to escape to the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine. As the journey continues, their merry band of misfit continues to grow, from Mission Veo to the murderous HK-47, with you slowly becoming a Jedi, learning of your mysterious past, and challenging the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Malak. Along the way you have to make various choices, akin to Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, but with the signature Star Wars flair. These choices can either be just minor ones like deciding where to go, to major impactful choices that reverberate throughout the game. If you act in an evil or heroic way, you gain light side or dark side points which contribute to who your character will become. Heading down the path of the dark side may disgust the majority of your members, while others may relish in your villainy. The fate of the galaxy is in your hands, and whether you conquer or save it is all up to you. But, as with any BioWare game, story and gameplay go hand in hand, and Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic was no exception. There were your variants of classes, both new and old, that felt right at home in the Star Wars universe with unique stats to go along with them. Even the light side and dark side became intertwined with the gameplay, as force powers specific to each side would be attainable after some time. However, for the battle system, Knights of the Old Republic still held to the D20 rule set implemented into the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons that started the company on its winning streak, albeit with lightsabers and blasters as the characters' weapons of choice. On the surface, combat seems to work in real time, with fluid lightsaber duels being a major part of the experience. In actuality though, battles are round-based. Time is divided into these rounds, and then the combatants attack and react to each other simultaneously, giving the illusion of real-time combat. The number of actions you can perform each round is directly related to this. As with any other traditional turn-based RPG, your party was crucial to combat. Thankfully, you could take command of them on the fly, allowing you to experiment with different combat techniques and understand their own quirks. Sometimes, you wouldn't even have to fight. If you were on the light side, You could persuade your way out of a fight, while embracing the dark side could result in you having the ability to force choke an opponent before they even attacked. Knights of the Old Republic seemed like the perfect Star Wars game on the surface. Fantastic lightsaber combat, otherworldly characters, and fantastical planets with wildlife and locals to match. However, its inner workings felt distinctly like a BioWare title. A company that arrived in the gaming industry out of nowhere, after making hit after hit, found the pinnacle of its creation in Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic. Selling nearly 3 million copies across the Xbox and PC, their first entry into the Star Wars mythos wasn't just the hit Microsoft had wanted, but a phenomenon in the making. While the movies were falling apart at the seams, the video games had just reached their peak, and BioWare had created that tipping point. A harbinger of things to come, BioWare was not only leading Star Wars itself into a new and untrodden territory, but the genre as a whole towards something greater. The American RPG for years had honed in on the gameplay aspect, while leaving the story department a bit lacking. A few outliers had existed for sure, but they were never the majority, never the norm. With its innovative dialogue and morality systems alongside its stellar storyline and captivating gameplay, Knights of the Old Republic changed the very nature of the genre for years to come, launching its developers into stardom and its tale into the annals of history. And to think, none of this would have happened without one simple choice.
After 20 long years of hard times, nearly ending with their franchise's demise, Intelligent Systems and Fire Emblem were on a roll. Merchandising, spin-offs, cameo appearances, and the full backing of Nintendo as a new major IP. Fire Emblem was now the gaming industry's latest, hottest commodity. Everyone wanted to work on this critically acclaimed franchise, now more than ever, and Nintendo was looking for the series' latest prospects. This came with the news of a partnership between the publisher and Japanese mobile gaming provider, DINA. Nintendo wanted to enter the mobile phenomenon faster than any of its competitors at Sony and Microsoft, and felt that DINA, the owners of the uber-successful Mobile platform, were the right partners in this effort. At the time, they announced 2 titles, an Animal Crossing mobile game, and a brand new Fire Emblem title courtesy of Intelligent Systems themselves. They wouldn't let just anyone take a hold of their brand. They wanted themselves to be responsible for this. Incidentally, they had been thinking about making a mobile Fire Emblem game for years, so this new opportunity from Nintendo was one that they had been waiting for. Co-directed by Kohei Maeda and Shingo Matsushita of Nintendo SPD, this fresh take on the Fire Emblem formula seemed like a simple thing to make. They could have just thrown a bunch of their older characters, the series' famous battle system, and a simple story together and call it a day. And yes, they would do exactly that. But in the best way possible that they could. Many Fire Emblem titles that had veterans like Toru Narihiro and Yuka Sugiyoko, the majority of the team would be comprised of people who had worked on Fire Emblem Fates and Awakening. Hiriko Morishika was the main composer of the title, bringing much of the style that the series had developed over the past 4 years to the forefront. Kota Nakimura, Satoko Kurihara, Yu Oshima, and Kohei Maeda himself would decide on how to make a Fire Emblem story work on the go. And lastly, Yusuke Kazaki returned as the lead character designer, a key position needed for one of the most important features of the game, the entire franchise's lineup of heroes. There were new characters for this adventure for sure, but the crux of the whole project was bringing many of the classic heroes back to life to introduce them to modern audiences, an idea they had been tinkering with in Awakening and Fates. The best part of this, though, is that they would all be voiced, many for the first time in countries outside of Japan, with new and exciting designs created by the very best artists in the Japanese industry: Wada Sachiko, Ueda Yumihito, Himuka Yuji, Fujisaka Kimihiko, Hako, and so many more lent their talents to make each and every character look visually distinct from one another, with Kozaki especially drawing the main characters to go along with Fire Emblem's established style. As this would be Fire Emblem's first consecutive global release, the art wasn't even half of it. The voice acting, now that was the difficult part. They needed to gather hundreds of actors together for the 39 countries they were releasing in combined, with each voicing the little quips that gives the character's personality. Intelligent Systems wanted this to be a celebration of all things Fire Emblem. If the characters didn't feel like their original selves, then it would all be for nothing. But mobile development isn't as taxing as other mediums, so they were able to get the game out right on time. Fire Emblem Heroes, releasing on February 2nd, 2017 worldwide, was the Fire Emblem you knew and loved, simplified for mobile convenience. You play as the Summoner, a hero who has been summoned from another world to save the kingdom of Esker from the evil Emblian Empire, and their leader, Princess Veronica. The world you enter is very unique from other Fire Emblem realms, as the two warring kingdoms possess the ability to open and close portals to classic Fire Emblem worlds, and either recruit or steal the heroes that live there to fight by their side. Joining the Order of the Heroes alongside Prince Alphonse, Princess Sharina, and their leader Anna, it's your job to free the heroes of these worlds and defeat the Emblian Empire. And that's about it. Other than a few cutscenes here and there, there's relatively no story at all. You just go through the various worlds, fight and free the heroes held captive there, and rinse and repeat. At the moment, Fire Emblem Heroes is the most simplistic and dull story the Fire Emblem series has ever had, but this game was never really meant for that anyway. The gameplay and heroes were what were most intriguing. Unlike the plot, the gameplay is essentially the same. Using the weapon triangle system that they had had for the past decade and a half, it was only tweaked in the sense that all of the weapon types were now color-coded, making it easier to understand what each of them was weak to. Fighting was made much easier too. All you have to do is simply move an ally over to the enemy using the touchscreen and, depending on their stats and weapon of choice, you either win or lose. Permadeath, unfortunately, was completely thrown out to prevent frustration from new Fire Emblem fans, with hard and lunatic level difficulties being unlockable over time. When you aren't in the mood for playing through the main story, there are other modes to unlock, like the Training Tower, where you can gain more EXP, shards, and crystals to level up, arena duels that let you fight against other players' teams, special maps that let you recruit a new character each day alongside other events, and lastly, paralogs, which play out as side stories like any other Fire Emblem game. Heroes also only uses 4 units on the battlefield, as the maps were made to be 8x6 grids so they could easily fit onto the screen of a smartphone. But this team of 4 is as customizable as any other Fire Emblem game, with over 100 heroes to choose from that either consist of the classic games like the Binding Blade or more recent ones like Fates. The ability to pick your favorite characters from across the decades was something to behold, each with a bio that told you exactly who they were and where they came from. Yet, you couldn't just choose your favorites from the start. Oh no, you had to pray that the summoning ritual would bring forth the ones you desired, with a good star level to match. Stamina was another feature, or rather, hindrance, that came into play that stopped you from playing for a time unless you either waited or coughed up some cash. Just like any other mobile title, Fire Emblem Heroes was laden with microtransactions, and the orbs were Fire Emblem's method of choice. While you could earn 1 a pop by playing through each of the story's 9 chapters, along with several challenges and events, there was always the option to take the easy route and pay for more orbs to gain more heroes. Thankfully, Intelligent Systems built the summoning ritual as a completely randomized mechanic. If someone decided to pay, say, $1,000, they might not even see all of the characters in the game, leveling the playing field between players. Kohei Maeda and his team wanted anyone to have a chance to play a Fire Emblem title, which is why they made it free to play. However, they didn't want anyone to steamroll through it just because they were rich. That's why everything else, the features essential to the gameplay, are free and have to be earned through your hard work and determination. Fire Emblem Heroes was definitely a Fire Emblem game for sure, but its mobile inner workings might have hindered it a bit. This was a necessary evil, however, as how could a free game ever be profitable without them? Even if most people play it for free forever, the other fans are certainly content to spend their hard-earned cash, since Fire Emblem Heroes has raked in $2.9 million globally on the first day, no less. This little app is definitely an enigma in the long line of Fire Emblem titles. Its story is nearly non-existent, its gameplay is forgiving at times, and its characters take forever to obtain. Still, Heroes stands as a celebration of all things Fire Emblem. People who had never played any other games outside of Fire Emblem Awakening and Fates, and others who would have never even guessed that there were Japanese-only Fire Emblem titles out there, could catch a glimpse of its history. Fire Emblem Heroes is a vehicle for the entire series to be introduced to the world and for everyone to find out what they've been missing. If anything, we must at least be thankful that they all will find out what a glorious franchise Fire Emblem truly is.
If we don't break all the